I'm going to turn your attention to Psalm 11 today, and I'd like you to read along with me if you have the opportunity. I'm going to be reading from the Christian Standard Bible here. Yours will read a little bit differently, perhaps. There's some question about the punctuation and the person of some of the things that are being said here, especially in the first few verses. But in a general sense, I think we'll take away the same essential lesson, and that is that we are living in a world with crumbling foundations. We are living in a world, and I don't know if it's especially the case with American Christians. It seems like it is. You may or may not agree, but we live in a culture that is rooted in large measure on biblical values, on Christian principles. How accurate or how well-intentioned or how sincere or whatever the founders may have been with regard to these principles, we can agree to disagree maybe on that. But I think it's reasonable and pretty much obvious to say that this world that we created for ourselves on these shores was in large measure focused on the Bible, focused on Jesus, however imperfectly. And it is not so nearly so much anymore. And we can see that as kind of an example of what David's writing about here, these crumbling foundations. And regardless of how political you want to get or not get with regard to this, I think it is fair to say that the world that we live in does not stand for Bible principles as much as we would like it to, or as much perhaps as it once did, or seemed to at least. And that may seem like God is asleep at the switch. And that is not a new phenomenon, by the way. People have always wondered if God was perhaps not aware or not powerful enough or not loving enough or not involved enough to get involved in these kind of situations here. Always when things are not going the way that we think that they should. When God is not acting the way that we would expect him to act, or the way we would act if we were God, etc. And Psalm 11 is a really good reminder, I think, for us to put our principles in the right place, for us to truly trust that he is watching over us. And when we see these crumbling foundations, not lose hope, not lose heart, and take some comfort, take some consolation and some hope in the idea that God is not asleep at the switch, that he is in fact watching over us. I'd like to read through Psalm 11 here a little bit, starting verse number 1, and yours again may read a little bit differently here. For the choir director of David, I have taken refuge in the Lord. How can you say to me, escape to the mountains like a bird? For look, the wicked string bows. They put their arrows on bowstrings to shoot from the shadows at the upright in heart. When the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord, his throne is in heaven. His eyes watch, his gaze examines everyone. The Lord examines the righteous, but he hates the wicked and those who love violence. Let him rain burning coals and sulfur on the wicked. Let a scorching wind be the portion in their cup. For the Lord is righteous. He loves righteous deeds. The upright will see his face. I love the idea of the upright seeing his face, and I'm planning, Lord willing, to talk about that more next week. But for now, I want to talk about this introductory phrase here, this introductory paragraph. Basically, the way the CSB punctuates this, I don't know if you want to call critics necessarily, but the naysayers who do not have David's faith are saying that these foundations are crumbling. They are encouraging him to escape to the mountains, which ironically is something that David did, at least essentially he did. He ran away from trouble from time to time when his faith was not what it ought to be, when he was suffering the consequences of his own mistakes, etc., in the plan of God. And we can tell those stories maybe another time. But they are pointing to the same ones that the wicked are stringing bows and putting arrows on bowstrings to shoot. And they are the ones who say when the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? Which is to say, what can David do? Or if they consider themselves one of David's spiritual companions, what can we do? When the world is against us, when the bad people are on the move and advancing in the cause of wickedness, it seems like we as human beings don't have anything that we can do to help, essentially. Well, there are things that we can do. And there are things that we shouldn't do, that we can't do. And I think that sometimes we will get really focused on the things that we would like to do and find ourselves incapable of doing, rather than doing the things that are completely and totally in our power. For instance, the righteous can trust. That's what you can do. And that is, I think, the biggest takeaway of all of this. You can believe that God is watching over you. You can believe that God is alive and active in the affairs of men, that he is reigning in heaven. There's a great story in Exodus chapter 33, of course, that talks about Moses and his connection, his physical connection even with God, and the idea that he wanted to be in the presence of God in the fullest sense, and God says you can't do that, you can't do that and live. But he says there he's going to place him in the crevice of the rock, in the crack of the rock. We have songs written about this phenomenon here. The Lord said in verse number 21, here's a place near me. You're to stand on the rock, and when my glory passes by, I will put you in the crevice of the rock and cover you with my hand until I passed by. Then I will take my hand away, and you'll see my back, but my face will not be seen. We cannot possibly fully understand everything there is to know about this occurrence here. I'm not going to even try to speculate about this. What I do know is this, that being in the presence of God is a dangerous kind of thing. And that is what David is experiencing here. The downfall, especially if you're looking at the Absalom story and related stories in David's life, these problems that are in David's life are because of God. God is bringing this upon him in a very real sense. And being protected from the problems of the world you can look at it anyway, is essentially being the same thing as being protected from God. And it can seem like a distressing or a depressing kind of thing, but what it should be in the heart of the faithful is an inspiring thing. That if we are not what we ought to be, if we are underachieving, and we're always going to be underachieving, but if we find ourselves in these horrible, horrible situations, largely, if not mostly, of our own making, we can be terrified in the presence of God. But we have enough faith to realize that God is not only the problem, he's also the solution. That hovering close to God, that allowing him to provide us protection from himself, is the only way that we're going to survive this. This is what grace is. This is falling on our face before the Lord and begging for mercy, begging for grace, having confidence that he hears us despite our shortcomings, despite our rebellion, despite our horrible attitude, sometimes our awful failure, and again, these consequences that we've brought upon ourselves. This is not a sign that God has forgotten about us. This is a sign that God is manifesting his control in a way that we may not fully understand and that we may not have chosen in and of ourselves, but is real. And we can put trust in that. We can put confidence in that. Surely if God wanted to show himself to us, he would do it in a safe kind of way. He would not put us in danger in the first place. That's what Moses may have been saying, but he didn't appear to say that. He was delighted to be in the presence of God in any context and trusted that God would provide for him in that moment. David has that same kind of confidence. You and I should have that same kind of confidence. We also can, while we're sitting here waiting, while we're trusting that God's going to watch over us, we can worship him. And the psalm talks about that. It talks about lifting up our hearts and our minds and our spirits to him and allowing him to reign in our hearts. If you ever find yourself with a spare 30 seconds in the middle of disaster, what better thing for you to do than to worship, than to pray, than to show the trust that we have in him by expressing this gratitude, this praise. I love the expression of Habakkuk after God has, for a couple of chapters now, 2.5 chapters, explained the trouble that is coming to the nation, and Habakkuk's going to be, at least to a certain degree, witness to all of this. He already is. And he's got an explanation, and he didn't like that explanation very much, but he trusted that it was true. He said at the beginning of chapter 2, before he even got the explanation, that I'm going to allow God to explain himself, and then I'm going to see that I'm wrong. That's the way this is going to work. And then God told him all of these things that he's going to do. And Habakkuk says, I heard and I trembled within. Verse number 16, chapter 3, my lip quivered at the sound. Rottenness entered my bones. I trembled where I stood. Now I must quietly wait for the day of distress to come against the people invading us. Though the fig does not bud and there is no fruit on the vines, though the olive crop fails and the fields produce no food, though the flocks disappear from the pen and there are no herds in the stalls, Yet I will celebrate in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. The Lord, my Lord, is my strength. He makes my feet like those of a deer, enables me to walk on the mountain heights. This is the confidence that Habakkuk can have as he is anticipating things getting worse, not better, but worse. He says that if all these horrible, horrible things that he can imagine actually happen, he is still going to have confidence that God is watching over us, that he is lifting us up, and therefore he is still worthy of praise as he comes in judgment against his own people, against his people's enemies, all of the above, none of the above. No matter what is or is not happening in the moment, this is a God who deserves and merits our worship, our attention at all times. There's no need for us to wait around, and the Psalms are full of examples of this, by the way. There's no need for us to wait around for our situation to be resolved and then worship God. By all means, worship God when your situation is resolved, but why not worship him ahead of time? Why not worship him in the valleys as well as the mountaintop experiences? And that kind of goes along with the third point I wanted to talk about, the idea of waiting. This is what you can do. You can wait. You don't have to have this all resolved immediately. You don't have to see the hand of God working every hour of every day. You can have confidence that he is working these things out, that he is aware of these things, that he is the one who is praiseworthy, and as such will work out his judgment, his justice in his way, in his time, which may or may not coincide with your timetable, probably doesn't, may or may not coincide with your own personal judgment, probably doesn't. But in any case, we can have confidence that God will, in his time, work all these things out. And if we never live long enough to see it all resolved, and in the big picture we won't, if we never see good triumph over evil in some kind of titanic, climactic, all-inclusive kind of way, well, that's what eternity is for. That's what judgment is for. We're not going to see that in this life. We may not even see smatterings of that. I think that you will if you look for it. It is there. Justice is in the world. God is meting out justice every hour of every day. Maybe not in your corner of the world, unfortunately, not where you were hoping that he would come to manifest himself. But in any case, we can have confidence that what God has done in the past, he will continue to do. That God is a God of justice. He is a God of vengeance. He is a God who will uphold the hands of the righteous. James calls it the early and later rains in James chapter 5, verses 7 and 8. And I love that expression there. We've seen early rains. We've seen the presence of God in our lives enough to make us realize, yes, God is there with us. And maybe rains are on my mind these days because we've gotten an awful lot of rain here in Central Texas. Very unusual for June, and we're grateful for that. We got a little bit of it yesterday even as I'm recording this. What a wonderful blessing that is. An even bigger blessing is that greater blessings are yet to come, whether it's talking about literal rain or we're talking about the harvest that comes from the early and later rains, or we're talking about spiritual things in the biggest picture of all. Either way, God will work all these things out as we see him meting out his justice, as we see evil being punished, at least from time to time in this life. This encourages us to wait for what God is planning in the future. Habakkuk maybe never lived to see the fullness of what God had in mind, and he certainly didn't live long enough to see the fullness of God's mercy toward his people. He didn't have to. He was willing to wait. He was willing to have confidence that God was and is reigning in heaven, and he was privileged to live by faith, as chapter 2 and verse number 4 tells us there. The righteous are going to live by faith. If he can be a faithful one, if we can be faithful ones, we can have confidence this will all work itself out in God's way. Maybe your way, maybe not your way, but it'll work itself out in God's way. So essentially the answer to the question here, what can the righteous do? The answer very well may be not very much. It may be virtually nothing at all as far as concrete things go. We've talked about a few things that we can do of a spiritual nature that may or may not give you any satisfaction in the moment. Putting your trust in God, worshiping God, waiting for God to do his thing in his way. We can quit worrying about what is necessary for me to do and trust that God is in control of these things. And if we will submit to God and if we will trust in Him to work out His things in His ways, good things can and will happen to us. That is the promise that He has given to His people from time immemorial, and it continues to be the promise that He gives to us today. So I hope you can read Psalm 11 in a time of turmoil, in a time of difficulty and doubt, and maybe you're questioning your faith and you're questioning your purpose, etc., and realize that there's no need for you to flee to the mountains. And by the way, oftentimes in the Psalms and other passages in the Old Testament, mountains are affiliated with foreign powers and foreign gods that rule in those powers. Maybe you need to just quit on God. Maybe you just need to give up on that entirely and have a totally different philosophy of life, a totally different aspect on life. No, don't flee to the mountains. Don't give up on what God has done for you. Run toward His mountain. Run toward Mount Zion. Run toward the kingdom that He established through His Son, Jesus Christ, that you as a child of God are an eager and blessed participant in. And if you're not that, if you have not given yourself over to Jesus, if you have not trusted in His salvation, flee to Jesus. Flee to the kingdom of God's dear Son. This is where salvation is found. It's the only place, ultimately, where salvation is found. You may get some satisfaction in the short term, and you may be missing satisfaction in the short term if you flee to Jesus. That doesn't change the essentials of what we're talking about here. Ultimately, fleeing to the mountain is a mistake. Fleeing to God, that's what you need to be doing, and that's what I encourage you to do here today and throughout your life. And I hope that this lesson is a blessing to you. I hope that it brings you closer to God and encourages you in your walk of faith in an increasingly, seems like anyway, increasingly hostile and difficult world. Thank you very much for following along and for reading. God bless.